This happened a few years ago. I was 16 at the time, and my little sister Millie was only 8 years old. Every summer, my family would spend a few days at my grandparents' old vacation house in a quiet mountain town. It was one of those small suburban areas which always seemed to be calm and pretty much isolated from everything else. The first day we arrived, my parents stayed inside unpacking all our stuff, while Millie and I explored the property together. Behind the house, there was a large yard that stretched toward a small patch of trees. It seemed like a fun place since there were plenty of place for a kid to hide. That evening, after dinner, Millie asked me to play hide and seek with her before we go to bed. I was kinda reluctant at first since it had gotten pretty dark outside, but Millie was practically begging me to play with her, so I eventually gave in. I turned around and counted to 50, while she ran off somewhere to hide. When I finished counting, I started searching the yard since that seemed like the obvious spot that she would choose, but she wasn't there. So I went a bit further and checked behind the shed, around the porch, and even inside the garage. But she wasn't in any of those places either. At first, I thought that she was just taking the game a bit too seriously since she really wanted to play after all. But after several more minutes had passed, and there was no sign of her, I started getting nervous. It was really dark at this point, and the property was backed up against a forested area. I was worried that she might have wandered off into the woods alone at this time. I started scanning the yard, and then walked toward the tree line, calling out her name as I went. And after a few more attempts, I finally spotted her. She was standing near the edge of the property, and she was talking to a man that I hadn't seen in this area before. I was really nervous at this point, so I ran straight toward them. As I got closer, the man looked over at me and gave me a calm smile. He calmly explained to me that he thought that my sister might have been lost in this place since she was all by herself. So he was just trying to help her find her parents. I gave Millie a tight hug, grateful that she was fine. Then I turned toward the man. But before I could even respond to him, he just gave me a small wave. Then he turned around and casually walked away down the road. That whole interaction felt really strange. I was thankful that he helped her, but he didn't even give me a chance to talk. He just left quickly, like he was in a rush to get away or something. I brushed it off and grabbed Millie's hand and walked back toward the house. On the way back, I asked her what she was talking to that guy about. She said that she was hiding behind one of the trees, when out of nowhere, that guy came over to her. He asked her if she was all alone, and exactly where her parents were. Then he told her to come with him, because he would take her to her parents. And as soon as I heard that, I froze for a second. That man didn't know our parents. He had no idea who we were. So why was he trying to convince my little sister to leave with him? Something about that whole encounter suddenly felt very wrong. But even then, I didn't tell my parents right away because I honestly wasn't sure if I was overreacting. Maybe he really thought that she was lost and was just trying to help. But trust me when I say this wasn't even the most terrifying part. That night, we were all sitting around, eating dinner together. I remember the TV was on in the background. And as we sat there, all of a sudden, the news on the TV cut to a breaking news alert. A photograph appeared on the news, and as soon as I saw that picture, my entire body went cold. It was the picture of that same exact man that we had met earlier. The reporter said that the police were searching for a suspect that was connected to several attempted child abductions in the surrounding communities, Parents were being warned not to let their kids out of sight. I felt so sick in that moment that I can't even explain it. I ended up telling my parents exactly what had happened, and needless to say that my parents were absolutely furious for not telling them before. My dad ended up calling the police, and later that night, several police officers arrived at our house and took statements from both me and Millie. We didn't hear from the police after that, and I don't know if that guy was ever caught. But regardless, I've thought about that moment countless times. What would have happened if I'd just taken another minute to find my sister? I honestly don't know if she would have still been standing there when I arrived. This story took place last summer. One weekend, I had spent the evening hanging out at my friend's house. It was actually one of the places owned by his family, and it was located at the edge of the town. We often hung out there and used it as a nice getaway place. It had gotten much later than I expected, and by the time I started driving home, it was already close to midnight. The road was almost completely empty, and it was a lot darker than I expected. About halfway home, my car suddenly started making a strange knocking sound, and then a few seconds later, the engine died out completely. I coasted onto the shoulder of the road and tried starting it again, but it wouldn't turn over. There was still plenty of gas left in the tank, which meant there was probably some other issue. So I was basically just stranded in the middle of a highway with nothing but deep woods on both sides. There weren't any houses nearby, and I hadn't seen any car in several minutes. So I called my older brother Joe and explained to him what had happened. Joe told me to stay inside the car and that he would be sending one of his friends, Alex, who actually lived nearby, to pick me up. He said that it would probably take about 15 to 20 minutes, so I should just stay put in the car and wait for a while. I thanked him and put the phone down, and then I began waiting. But I didn't have to wait for too long, because only about 5 minutes later, I saw a pair of headlights appear in my rearview mirror. It was a small pickup truck. The pickup truck slowed down and pulled over right behind my car. He arrived a lot quicker than I expected, but I was just glad that he was here. It was certainly weird being alone in the middle of a highway with nowhere to go. I got out of the car and walked over to the truck. The driver rolled down the window and leaned out to look at me. But without waiting for him to talk, I just instantly blurted out if this was Alex and if Joe had sent him here. The driver paused for a second, then he smiled at me, and then he said that yes, he was Alex and that Joe had sent him here to pick me up. Then he told me to hop inside. I remember feeling relieved in that moment. I was wondering how long all this would take, but thankfully it was all sorted out within minutes. I told Alex to wait while I locked my car and grabbed a few things from inside. He simply nodded and said that it wasn't a problem. I walked back to my car and reached across the passenger seat to grab my backpack. But right then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Joe. The text said that Alex had just left and that he'll be here in about 10 minutes. I just typed back telling Joe not to worry since Alex was already here, so I'll be seeing him soon. But as soon as I typed that, almost immediately, my phone started ringing. It was a call from Joe, so I answered immediately. Joe sounded very confused. He asked me, "What do you mean he's already there?" I just looked over to the pickup truck and said that I'm talking about your friend and that he's already here. There was a long pause. Then Joe asked me to describe what that man looked like. And so I did. And there was yet another big pause. But then Joe finally answered and said something I'll never forget. "That's not Alex." And as soon as I heard those words, my heart instantly dropped. I asked him what the heck he was talking about, and he told me that he had just got off the phone with Alex, and Alex had just left his house just a few moments ago, so there was no way that he actually got there that fast. I was really worried by now. Who in the world was this guy? Joe told me to stay away from him and not to get inside the truck no matter what. I slowly looked back toward the pickup truck and saw that the driver was sitting there, watching me. I turned away from the truck and pretended like I was still having a conversation on the phone. Then, keeping my distance from him, I turned toward him, and I said that my brother was already on his way and that he would come pick me up instead. It was obviously a stupid excuse considering that this guy was supposedly sent by my brother, but it was honestly the best I could come up with on the spot. The man didn't respond, and I could see the expression on his face change immediately. He stared at me for a few more seconds. Then, without saying another word, he rolled up his window and drove away in the opposite direction. And then a few moments later, my brother called me again, and Alex arrived almost simultaneously. I was thankfully able to make it home safe that night, although I think it goes without saying that it was a close call if anything. I never found out who that guy was, or why in the world he was trying so hard to get me inside his truck, but I think I do have a rough idea on why he was doing that. I think I've watched enough movies and listened to enough scary stories to know how this usually went. I just thanked my luck that Joe texted me in that moment, because I was about to get inside his truck, and I just know that it wasn't going to end well. I was a huge basketball fan as a kid, so when I was 13, my parents enrolled me in a local basketball academy. Back then, I used to walk home from basketball practice every Tuesday and Thursday. The route was always the same. It was only about a 15-minute walk, and most of it went through a quiet residential neighborhood, so my parents never had a problem letting me walk home by myself. One evening, practice ended a little later than usual. By the time I started walking home, the sun had already gone down, and most people had gone inside for the night. About 5 minutes into my walk, I noticed a white van slowly driving behind me. I didn't think much of it. Cars drove through this neighborhood all the time. But after another minute, the van pulled up beside me, and the driver rolled down his window. He looked like he was in his early 40s. He smiled and asked me if I was Richard's son. That caught me off guard. Richard was the name of my father. I asked him how he knew my dad. He said that they worked together, and my dad had asked him to come pick me up because there had been a family emergency. For a second, I almost believed him, but then I realized something. My dad knew exactly where I was, and he would have called me if there really had been a family emergency. I was very skeptical, so I told the man that I'd rather just walk home. He started laughing and said that my dad was already waiting for me and told me to just hop in. I had a bad feeling about this. I told him that I preferred walking and my house wasn't too far away. But instead of driving away, the van continued creeping along beside me. It was honestly really strange and bizarre. The man kept talking to me and told me that I was making things difficult and that my parents were probably worried about me. I was almost sure that this guy was lying at this point, so I picked up the pace and started walking faster. But then, I heard something. It was the sound of the passenger door unlocking. The man pushed it open slightly, and in a very deep and stern voice, he told me to get the hell inside the car. And that was all I needed to hear. I turned around and ran as fast as I could. About half a block away, there was a small convenience store, so I sprinted straight inside. The cashier immediately noticed that something was wrong and asked me if I was okay. I told him what was going on, and the cashier peeked outside the front window. The van was still sitting across the street for a few seconds, but then it slowly drove away. The cashier locked the front door and called my parents. My dad arrived just a few seconds later, and the police were contacted immediately afterwards. I never got the license plate number, and I couldn't give them much more than a basic description of the driver, so nothing ever came of it. I think I'm just lucky enough to have escaped at the right time, because I've heard much worse things go down. If I hadn't questioned his story, or if I had been just a little younger, I think I might have actually climbed inside the van without thinking twice. I hope everybody out there stays safe. It's a huge world with a lot of creeps out there.